What's going on, everyone? Let me know if you can hear me okay in the chat. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. Just had one thing I wanted to finish setting up before we started. I think it's good now. Okay. Nice. Can you hear me in the chat? Hearing you fine. Nice, nice. All right, so welcome to the Engineer Man live stream on the Linux command line. So before I get going, if you would like to ask a question, as you probably saw on the intro screen, you can ask it in the chat. I have a ton of questions that I got prior to this stream. We have a ton, I think 28, maybe 30 in total. So we're going to try to get through all of them. It's about 2 minutes a question. So we're going to put out a lot of information for everybody. Everybody's going to learn a lot of stuff about Linux and whatnot. So If you have a question during the stream, I'll be checking chat. If you want to increase the chance that I get it, because it's gonna be a lot of chat and I'll be doing a lot of talking, you can prefix your question with Q:, question:, Q, or question, and then it will show up in my Discord. So that's the best way to ask a question. However, as we progress through the stream, if you want to add something, please put it in the chat. I'll be looking over there, and I'll try to answer it over there as well as from Discord. So it'll be good. Before we begin, just a couple meta topics. Obviously, we have a new stream schedule and a new stream format. It's been working out really well. The streams are pretty much entirely question and answer now, unless a question leads to some practical usage of whatever it is we're talking about, in which case I will actually do something practical either in a terminal or show you some code or something like that. But the content is completely and 100% driven by the audience now, and it's driven by the audience up front before I do the stream, which hopefully makes it so I cover everything people want and nothing people don't want. So I think we're on stream number 2, having done it that way, and it's been terrific. So we're going to continue. Yeah, two dislikes. I understand that. There's some like weird phenomenon with my live streams to where they get disliked before the stream even starts. So I don't know if it's people trolling me or whatnot. It's very strange. 428ish. I am doing great, thank you. So the other topic, of course, is coronavirus. 1 month ago, it was just getting into the heat of it. Since then, of course, it's gotten way worse. I just want to hope everybody's doing good and being safe with that and all that. And I hope that this can be behind us ASAP, because it is a massive interruption to everything. So I'll be happy when that's over with and done. Not that I personally leave the house that much, but I do everything online, everything. But there are a lot of people who don't, and people are being adversely impacted quite a bit by it. So for their sake, as well as, of course, my families and whatnot, other people's families and everybody, I hope that is past us. So I have that's really all I had for channel announcements. Channel's healthy, Discord's healthy, everything's good. So let's just kind of jump in. I got a couple questions here. I'm going to look at some of the questions that I just got in chat, and then we're going to jump into the questions that were submitted ahead of time. I was able to get everybody's question. So if you submitted a question to the Google form within the last, since I put it out about 7 days ago, then it's going to be answered on stream. So it'll be good. I suggest to add timestamp to your files on GitHub. That way we can go back and link to a certain training session on YouTube. Yes, so I need the reason I even cleaned up GitHub is more of a technical reason than anything else. If I were to change the file structure on GitHub, I'd have to go back and edit like 200 videos, and I haven't got around to doing that. I do want to change the folder structure on GitHub. I don't have the time to do it right now, but I will be doing that for sure, because one piece of feedback I get, same as from you, is that it's hard to find some of the content that people are looking for. Like it's badly labeled on GitHub. It's labeled just by a number, and if you don't click on the number from the GitHub, from the YouTube description, then you pretty much can't find it. And I know that's a problem, and I'm working towards fixing it. Donovan asks, any thoughts on ZFS? I keep hearing it pop up in videos, but I've not really checked it out. So I don't know much about it, to be honest. I don't pay too much attention for for those types of things. It's just one of those things where whether it's EXT or ZFS or anything else, I honestly don't pay too much attention about it. So I don't have a real good answer for that. I'm sorry. It's supposed to be new and improved, but there's a lot of new and improved stuff, and it has dubious quality. So, but I've heard good things about it. Beyond that, I don't really know. I'm sorry. So that was it for the questions there. Let's actually just jump into the questions that were submitted. So everybody that asked a question is in it. I did some of the questions were really long. Like somebody wrote me like a 5-paragraph question, so I condensed that down to just one sentence. I tried to capture the essence of what that person was trying to ask. And then if you asked a similar question, which was invariably going to happen, for a stream like this, two people are going to ask the same thing. So I merged that in with different things. So the first one here, difference between bash, CSH, fish, other shells, does difference really matter? That was asked by Shreyas, but a related question was also asked by Calix and Biden. So as far as the shells in Linux, it's one of those things where it's kind of like an editor. You want to use one that you like and that you can be productive in. So as far as the difference between them, the primary differences are the stuff that's built in. So when we speak about shells and whatnot, we're speaking about the thing once you log into a terminal, it's the environment that you're operating in there. Typically when you open a terminal, it's going to open, I think whatever's in maybe the shell environment variable. I'm not sure exactly what it opens, but it's going to open either bash or CSH or fish, or I'm sure it's other ones, SH, KSH. There's several different shells, and they differ in what is built in. So when we speak about a shell built in, let me open my terminal here. So when we talk about a shell built in, everybody knows if you've used bash for any period of time, then there's a command called alias. And what the alias command allows you to do is set an alias command to run another command. But what you may not know is that alias is not a program, it's a shell built in. So alias only functions on bash or shells that support aliases. Of course, I expect that most shells do support alias, but alias is not a program. And you can actually tell what's a program and what's not by using the which command. So like if we have ls that lists files, we know that's a program. If we do which ls, it'll tell us that that's located at /bin/ls. If we do which alias, you see that it doesn't do anything. And that's because alias is something that's built into bash. And that's true of things like, for loop and I'm trying to think of other stuff, source, the dot, probably some shell sets, ulimit. So there's a number of things that are shell built-ins. So as far as that, ZSH, fish, other shells, they're going to have different built-ins that do different things. The other big difference is going to be in the scripting. So bash scripting is not the same as ZSH scripting. So I assume they'd be similar, but they are not going to be the same. So if you switch shells, use another shell, you're going to be expected to know a different syntax for scripting. And now that's kind of that. Now, of course, you can use a different shell and still run bash scripts. You just can't run it through your shell. You'd have to basically tell it that this should execute with bash, and then bash can execute its own scripts. And that's kind of what it is. Pippin, hello, Engineer Man. Hello, how are you? Welcome to the stream. So, does it really matter? That's a big preference question. So to me, it doesn't matter. I've been using bash pretty much entirely. I've only briefly looked at another shell. I actually mentioned to some of my team members that I would actually really like to look at other shells, because I know that there are some that people swear by that offer a lot of features, and I kind of want to check it out. So, but right now, does it really matter? To me, no. To some, it definitely matters. Just like somebody's editor matters to them. So next question was asked by Unknown. I have written some effective bash scripts performing different tasks. I was considering changing everything over to Python based on the current environment and hype over Python. Should we simply leave our bash scripts in, well, bash, or is there a good reason to convert them over to Python? So the answer to this is the classic, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And if it's working, then it's working. And the second point is that anytime you look at converting code from one language to another, you got to let the requirement and the business need drive that decision. And that's also true if you're just solo developing and you're not even part of a business. There has to be a reason to refactor something over. And typically that occurs because it's either unstable or you eventually want to expand it later and you know that bash is not the way forward, something like that. So you kind of got to look at what am I going to be doing with this script in the long term. You know, if I have a set of bash scripts that does a very specific purpose, and I know that they can just continue doing that forever, and I don't need to ever improve it, then it doesn't make sense to convert it to Python. You could use that time to do something else. So I guess my advice would be probably be cautious about converting it to Python, but if you think you might expand it over time, it might be worth converting it over. Also, I guess if the script is short, it wouldn't take you that it wouldn't take you that long, then I suppose that'd be a factor too. Okay. Next question is from Jonathan Lee. What are daemons? What are they used for? So there's some confusion over daemons. The kind of the broad definition of a daemon is a process that runs in the background. But it can't just be any process that runs in the background. If I come over to my terminal and I do sleep 60, a process that sleeps for 60, and I simply put it in the background and hit enter, this doesn't make it a daemon, really. It's just a process that's in the background. So when we think about daemons, we're thinking about processes that run in the background but are not attached to a terminal. And it's often processes that are started when the system starts up, and it's often processes that have a parent PID as your init system. So a daemon is often controlled by PID1 like systemd. And then daemons typically have the D suffix. So like systemd, it's called systemd because it's system daemon. The D is for daemon. You know, systemd uses journald, you know, which is a daemon for journal logging and whatnot. And you know, it's syslogd. You know, I've written a project called dispenserd. You know, here again, that was a project that was designed to run in the background, started by an init process. It was not designed to be ran by a user in the foreground, although you could have certainly done that in some cases. There's also MySQLd, you know, which is the MySQL background process that sits and does its work. So yeah, broadly, it's background processes. Strictly speaking, it's background processes that are controlled by PID1 that are designed to just operate as a background service, not attached to any terminal. And then optionally, they have the D suffix. Yeah, MongoD. You know, there's a lot of things out there. That dates back to Unix. That's a common thing to do, and that's been SSHD. Yeah, there's so many. Now that you know that little fact, you can look in your system and you'll find that there's tons of tons of D kind of things. Can you do a quick tutorial on top? Sure, I can do top real quick. So the most common usage for top, of course, is you turn it on and it shows you all your stuff. The one thing that you can do with top is you can navigate with shift left and right angle bracket. So like if you want to sort by CPU, you can, you know, click right angle bracket. You know, if you do it again, it'll go to, I'm sorry, okay, yeah, CPU, you know, then it'll go to memory, and then time, and then command, and you can sort all the way through these, all the way back to PID or user. So that's one common use for top. I don't actually use top that often, but this is about the extent for what I do it. The other thing you can do is you can make top go faster with -D. So if you wanted to refresh like every half a second, you can do -D 0.5, and then now you get top that goes really fast. You could even go with like 0.1 to make it go extremely fast. And this would be a way of you know, tracking the programs that are running on your computer. So that's my 2-minute tutorial on top. So moving on, this was asked by SuperChump123. Why does the Linux command line feel so much better and easier to use than either command prompt or PowerShell? And I'm actually really glad somebody asked about this because, you know, of course, the Windows analog to just the Linux terminal is command prompt followed by PowerShell. And the answer is really simple, and it's because Linux and Unix were designed with the terminal on the forefront as a major component of the system and as a first-class tool. That is to say that Linux and Unix in the beginning were designed to be interacted and managed via a terminal. That's kind of just because that came first, and that goes even farther back in history. You know, the first computers that had a visual aid where the user could interact with it was done via a terminal, and so thus that kind of came first. You know, the whole Windows, like Windows in the abstract, not Microsoft Windows, but Windows, like the window that you're watching the stream on, is kind of an abstraction, you know, over other things. You know, that did not come first. The terminal came first. So the other thing is many programs are only available on the command line with Linux. You know, not everything has a GUI. And then there's been decades of development into the command line shells. And because of that, that's the reason why the command line is so powerful, is because communities, the Linux community specifically, and the vendors for these different shells have invested heavily into these shells and into the technology that backs it, both the commands as well as the shells, as well as interpreters and whatnot. So because of that, that's why they feel so powerful. You know, and then if we switch over to Windows, you know, Windows was designed GUI first. When you use Windows, you expect to be able to drag windows around. You expect to be able to interact with things via a GUI. Like the command prompt was not a first-class tool. The command prompt was just sort of a thing that was kind of there, you know, for various purposes. But the Microsoft Windows way is not to operate at the command line. It's to operate with a GUI. So, and then PowerShell, of course, was simply an afterthought. You know, PowerShell was something that just came recently. You know, PowerShell is not a new thing. And I believe PowerShell was released because they're trying to keep up with what Linux is doing. You know, so they said, well, we need a shell that is more powerful than command prompt, because command prompt's garbage. You know, but we can't use Linux, so we'll create PowerShell, which is hopefully the bash of Windows. But again, it was an afterthought. It's something that's new. It wasn't always there. And, you know, but PowerShell is that development effort, you know, the command prompt should have been. So that's why it feels smoother. Probably over time, you know, if Windows users use PowerShell for the next couple decades, and it's had a couple decades of development put into it, then I expect that PowerShell will be just as useful as the Linux command line. But here again, 2 decades from now, Linux will have an additional 2 decades of stuff put into it. Boris asks, do you use Elk Stack at all? If so, would you do a video on it someday? I have used Elasticsearch before in the past, and I have used Kibana before in the past, but not really. It's kind of a specialized thing. I don't reach for Elasticsearch that often. I usually reach for Elasticsearch when I want to make like a denormalized mirror of a lot of my SQL data. That way I can query into it quicker. But I don't have a ton of projects that ever warrant that, so I don't use it that often. Greg said top or HTOP. So I'm not big on like checking out my system. I usually just use top. I really, all I want to know with top, I do leave top running all the time in a little corner of my computer, and I do that just as a quick health check. I could just look up there and just make sure everything's copacetic. You know, make sure nothing's eating up all my RAM and CPU or something like that. But I don't use it for exploration of processes or anything like that. That's why I don't know a ton of advanced usage on it. If I need to explore a process or processes, then I'm more apt to use command line tools like PS. Abby asks, what about MS-DOS? Isn't command is basically MS-DOS in Windows? Yes. So MS-DOS is a good point. So MS-DOS was kind of something that you could get, but MS-DOS didn't take off. You know, MS-DOS wasn't, they didn't invest 2 decades into that. Like MS-DOS was a thing. It was the thing that was designed to be interacted with, you know, by the user directly, but that's not the thing that, you know, that's not where we're at today. So I guess once Microsoft Windows as we know it came out and started becoming ultra popular, MS-DOS sort of just fell by the wayside. Nobody wanted to use that. That wasn't cool. But with Linux, it's essential that be the way it is. And here again, that's probably why Microsoft Windows became the most popular thing, is because the average user does not want to interact with a computer via a command line. They want to interact with it with drag and drop. Us folks that use Linux, we want to use the terminal because that's actually easier for us. But that's not always true for all the users, and that's why Linux only has like a 4% desktop market share. And Windows has 80 something. But you're absolutely right. MS-DOS was kind of the prelude to Windows, and is in some respect still is included in the command line. Best way to sync Donovan asks, best way to sync data between Linux machines, SCP versus rsync. So SCP, I like rsync just because it's more powerful and it has the delete feature. Oftentimes when I'm syncing data with rsync, I'm syncing a lot of data and I want to basically create a mirror of that data on another system. So as far as I understand, SCP, which is CP over SSH, I don't think that supports that, but I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. But rsync does, and that's often why that's a better tool. So if I'm just copying a few files, star.tar.gz or something like that, then I'm more apt to just use SCP. But if I'm trying to move a lot of files, or I'm trying to create an exact sync, then I am more likely to use rsync. So hopefully I answered your question. rsync too strong, yeah. That's good. Oh, Ash asked, how would you decide what tasks to write bash scripts for? Hold on a second. How would you decide which tasks to write bash scripts for, or just a Python or Node script? So I'm actually gonna answer that later, just hold on to that thought. Okay, Kevin C. and Shreyas ask, can you show practical examples of name pipes and or when you might use custom FDs? So as far as both of these, I've actually not used any of these in a production kind of environment. I've never thought to myself, oh, I cannot solve this problem without a named pipe. It's just, in my experience, that hasn't happened. But I can think of a couple reasons why I might use one. So named pipes, as you know, or maybe you don't, you can make a named pipe with mkfifo and then, whatever. So what this does is this creates this special file, and this file is on disk. It has the property p, and it is a named pipe. The named pipe works a lot like the anonymous pipe, except it's a named one, and that means that things can write to it and read from it. So one of the primary things I can think of on why one might want to use this is if I want to get two processes to communicate to one another. With this, they can communicate through this pipe. Now, there's a lot of options for processes that communicate. It's called IPC, inter-process communication. And there's lots of options for it. You can use TCP, of course, but with TCP, you incur the actual cost of the network. Even though it's the same system and it's just looping back, it's still running through the whole network stack. So that may not be ideal. Of course, processes can communicate with one another through just flat files, but the issue is that you're incurring the I/O on the disk, and that may not be acceptable. But with pipes, you get to communicate through this without using any TCP and without writing anything to disk, because anything that's buffered in a named pipe exists entirely in memory, and that makes it very fast. So in terms of inter-process communication, besides a named pipe or like a Unix domain socket, I can't think of anything that's faster other than just like shared memory. Actually saying, I store this memory at this address block, here is the key to that address block, go and retrieve that memory. That's the only thing I can think of that would actually be faster. So that's kind of one thing about named pipes. As far as custom FDs, I didn't have a good answer for that. Mostly because I've never had a use case where I might use one. But custom FDs are good if you want to add an additional output channel other than standard out and standard error. However, your program would need to actually, write data onto that particular FD. So you'd have to, redirect like FD3 or FD4, then the program would need to actually write to FD3 or FD4. Daniel asks, do you see a future for Perl in the modern landscape? So it's funny, we actually, the team and I, we were discussing about Perl last night, and we were talking about how, Perl, although it's old, it's one of the few languages that you can guarantee to be on a Linux system. A lot of people think that Python is that language, but it's actually Perl. The farther back in time you go, the more you'll see that Perl is the only thing that remains. And this is because Perl was one of the earliest languages, and nope. Yeah, Perl was one of the earliest languages, both on the web and in the system, and a lot of things still depend on it today. So Perl is one of those things where if you go on your Linux system today, there's like a 99.9% chance that Perl is going to be on there, possibly even 100. So do I see a future for it? I mean, the Perl people certainly see a future for it as they're continuing to develop it. It's definitely not it's not a dead language from the perspective of, is the team working on it? Perl continues to have development done to it. Do I think it has a future? I think there's certain people that will continue to use Perl, but I can't imagine myself ever reaching for Perl as my language of choice. I used to write Perl back in the day. It was one of the first things. It was actually before PHP. That's what I looked at. That was back when the whole Perl CGI thing was really big. With CGI bin. Anybody that remembers that, Perl was the thing that you could write websites in. Before like PHP or Java or anything like that. Back in the day, you had really two options. You had classic ASP, or you had Perl. Those are sort of the foundations of the web. So, of course, we have a lot more options now, but back in the day, you didn't. That's what you got to use. Sorry for so many questions. What about a TMUX video? So I actually do want to cover TMUX, specifically TMUX, not Screen, because I like TMUX. I think it's simpler. And that's actually a great video idea. I'm going to record that here in Discord and check that out. So I'd possibly be looking for that. All right, moving on. We're going kind of slow here. This is actually a good question. I actually have to boot up something for this next one. So Akane458 asked, how come in Windows there's lots of fail-safes to stop people from completely destroying their installation, but in Linux you could just use the command line and do a simple rm-rf command and destroy your installation? So it's kind of a misconception that Linux is harder to destroy. It's actually not. So the first safeguard, for destroying your system, of course, is that you got to have sudo. You got to have super user permissions, and you need to actually either run it with sudo, type in your password, or you need to drop down to root and then run it. So the second thing is you can't just do rm-rf/. That's not really enough. You got to add the -- no preserve root option, and only then can you actually nuke your entire system. And then finally, yeah, so as far as Windows goes, I create a Windows VM just for this purpose. Of course, it's taken forever to load. I'll bring that back in a second. So you could destroy a Windows system just as easily, and you can do so by way of the rm-dir c:\\s. And I wanted to demonstrate that, because who doesn't want to see me destroy a Windows VM on stream, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up command prompt, just like I would Linux. So I'm going to do the equivalent here of opening it with sudo. So run as administrator. And then all I'm going to do once I have this open is I'm going to run just one simple command. I'm going to run rm-dir c:\\s. Are you sure you want to destroy C drive? Yes, I do, absolutely. So I'm just gonna let that run for a little bit. So right now, this is nuking a Windows system, you know, in the same way that rm-rf/nukes a Windows system. So we're just gonna slowly watch this thing as all its files and programs just slip away. So in the meantime, we'll wait for that to finish. That's gonna take a little time. It's a big system. So is there any way, next question, don't worry, we're gonna come back to that. Is there any way of obfuscating passwords past its parameters to commit? Oh, actually, I should have finished this other one. So the simple thing about it is it's just as easily to destroy both, and you're going to see that here in a second. So next question is, this is asked by Unknown. Is there any way of obfuscating passwords past its parameters to commands? So the thing about passwords is if a program needs a password, then the implication is you have to provide that password. So, or the password has to be available some way. Yeah, pwned by... Yeah, thanks for the 20, I appreciate that. Pwned by rm-rf, no preserve root. Yeah, you have to provide the no preserve root. If you don't provide that, then it's not going to allow you to do it. And certainly if you, certainly if you don't have, if you're not operating as a super user, then it ain't going to work anyways. So the -s is recursive. It's the equivalent of the -r for rm-r. It's not paused. It's just having a hard time. Remember, I am destroying the system, so you know this is an absolutely destructive command. So it's probably going to take a second. Actually, some of these probably don't even work. Let me open up. Okay, well that still works. Yeah, don't worry. It's not done being destroyed. Don't you worry about that. This thing's not gonna last. So as far as obfuscating passwords, you know, the best way to do that is simply not provide the password. If you must provide the password to a program, there are other options. You can put the password in like an environment variable. You could put it in a flat file that is accessible only to a specific user or process. You know, that's an option. And don't be afraid to do it like that. Remember, there's really no great way to store a password on a system where a program needs a password. That's just what it is. You know, oftentimes I advise people, if you're storing secrets on a server, you got to just make sure you protect the box. You got to make sure you protect that box and don't let anybody in. That's the primary way to keep it safe. But once somebody accesses a system, it doesn't really matter if your password's sitting there. I mean, it's either going to be sitting there, or it's going to be an environment variable where people can access. It's going to be on a flat file where people can access. It's going to be in your repository or your configuration file where people can access. It just, it is what it is. It's one of those cruxes of you know, operating with secrets. But fortunately, most programs don't mandate the password being in the command itself. I don't know of a single program that says you must supply the password in the command line. You know, usually, like for MySQL, you do -p, then it asks you for the password. Or if you're GPG encrypting, it'll ask you for a password, and so on and so forth. So it doesn't typically make you actually do anything. Oh, we're getting more. Uh-oh, this is getting bad. Is it at system 32 yet? Uh-oh, I clicked on the folder icon. It said Windows can't open this icon. It might have been removed, renamed. What about Edge? Oh, Edge is still working. Okay, so I've lost my file explorer. That's not a thing anymore. That's definitely gone. All right, we'll let this thing keep going. It's probably all but dead now. So WS asked, how has cloud changed command line monitoring of systems? So this was actually one of those like 3-paragraph questions that I got asked. And the essence of his question was that everything is now virtualized, everything. You know, you're getting full or partial CPUs, shared CPUs, you're getting chunks of RAM, you're getting chunks of hard drive. Sometimes you're getting hard drive that's actually IO limited. You know, I know with Google Cloud, the amount of bandwidth that you can get from a hard drive is dependent on the size of that hard drive. So if you have a 10 gigabyte hard drive or 20 gigabyte hard drive, you might only be able to get like 3 or 4 megabytes per second or something like that. So the more space you purchase, the more speed you get. So, but how is that actually occurring? The root of this question was, how would you go about monitoring things that are just fully virtualized? And the question is, you'd monitor them in the same way you always have. And that's because from the user's standpoint, although everything around you is virtualized, it still looks like it's not. When you buy a VM with Google or DigitalOcean or Linode or whatever, you are getting dedicated resources that look like it's a single machine. It looks like it's a single machine with 4 gigabytes of RAM, 1 core, and a 20 gig hard drive. Oh, I think it's dead now. Oh yeah, it's dead. Edge? Nope, Edge doesn't work. Search bar, that's dead. Can't do anything with that. Yeah, this whole thing's dead. I'm gonna try to restart it, see if it works. I don't think it's gonna. I think we killed it. I think he's dead, Jim. Is this thing gonna boot? Nope, your PC ran into a problem, needs to restart. Critical service failed. So, yeah, this is proof that one single command in a command prompt as administrator is enough to brick a Windows install. So at this point, you can't use it. You'd have to try to repair it, but I don't even know if that would work. I mean, you deleted all the files. So yeah, there's equally destructive commands for Windows as there is on Linux. So, oh, yeah, it's dead. He's dead, Jim. He's dead. Time to kill it. So that was fun. Little Windows murder on stream. Okay. So yeah, as far as cloud systems, you pay for resources in the cloud. The resources are dedicated. However, the resources just may not be what you think they are. Like storage is one of those things where oh, I hope people are still here. Is anybody still here? Good, one person's here. Nice. Yeah, we're gonna get going again. I'm just gonna post a quick announcement, get people back in here. The internet seems to be fine now. All right, we're gonna finish this up. Don't you worry about that. One more ping, and we're gonna get moving. Thanks for bearing with me. Sorry about that. That is, my ISP is so bad, as you can see. That's very unfortunate. Although they did say 2 hours and it took them like 10 minutes, so that's good. Okay. All right, let's get back to moving. I'm glad this fixed itself. I was a little disappointed over that. Hopefully I can trim out all that white space a little bit later. Yeah, make your own ISP. Yeah, I will do it. That's big brain strats right there. All right, everybody's coming back. Nice. We won't get back up to where we were, close to 300, but that's okay. We're gonna finish this out. So I think where I left off before my internet rudely interrupted me was, I was talking about monitoring systems and how, when you're operating in the cloud, things are not always what they seem. And, particularly like block storage, when you think about storage, the storage is almost always never physically attached to the machine. It's always usually this giant pool of network attached storage that is attached to the machine as if it were, physical attached. So like with Google, every single storage you get on Google, it's all just giant chunks of network attached storage, and they just carve out a certain portion of that out, and they say, all right, well, this is the part of the storage that's for you, and this and that. Tafin's, welcome back. No, welcome back to you as well. Sorry about that. I feel really bad about the whole stream getting cut short, but I didn't end it. I didn't click the end button, so it should all be in the same stream. I might have to trim out some of the white space, but we'll see. I don't know if YouTube's smart enough. We'll see. No. I'm perfectly fine. It's good. It's probably because I just took Chase outside, so now I'm like out of breath. But no, we're okay. I'm happy. Everybody's happy. We're all happy. So Unknown asked, do we still need Linux if we have OS X? And this is a great question because, you know, OS X I'm sorry, OS 10 or Mac OS. You know, they do have a lot of similarities, particularly in terms of the command line. And that's because Mac OS is built upon BSD, which is built upon Unix. Linux is built upon nothing. However, it is influenced by things like Minix and also Unix. So because both of the systems have a common, not ancestor, but influence, it makes sense that they operate in a similar way. So the short answer, do we still need Linux if we have OS 10? The short answer is absolutely you do. And that's because Linux does differ from Mac OS in one really key way, and it's that Apple software is all closed source. Pretty much all of it. So if you're wanting to take Mac OS and repackage it or redo it, you know, strip it down, something like that, to create your own Mac OS distro, you simply can't do that. That's not a thing that works. So that's the biggest difference between Linux and Mac OS, is Linux is open, Mac OS is not. That said, you know, a lot of the file structures and a lot of the way you interact with the command line on Mac OS is going to feel pretty similar, and a lot of the same programs do work over there. So, you know, while it is a similar experience, it's definitely not a suitable replacement for Linux, and therefore you still need Linux even if you have OS 10. Yeah, don't forget Xcode, right? Yeah, like everything is so closed. They make you do things their way, and that's what it is. Also, side note, thank you for everyone who stuck with the stream here. Even when I logged in, there was still like 50 people here waiting. So thanks for that. We're slowly climbing back up to where we were. Okay, a few questions from Saki. I appreciate all these questions. What is a snap and how does it work? So snaps are sort of this new concept. Snaps are almost like Docker for Linux programs. So whereas Docker is designed to run a specific version in a specific distro as its base, like Alpine Linux, CentOS, or whatever, but it's designed to run in any Linux distro, snaps are one of those things where they package up programs and make them possible to be ran on any system. But it's different from Docker because Docker is typically for background services, databases, apps, things like that. Whereas snaps are more like you can get a snap for, I don't know, a color picker, something like that. And you know, you wouldn't run a color picker through Docker, for instance. So that's the intent for snaps. I want to say that snaps are kind of the gateway to making universally available Linux programs, because that is one of the areas where Linux sort of falls short, is that each distro, or each major distro, when I talk about major distro, I'm referring to like Debian, Arch, Fedora, and each of these classes of distributions that have their own package managers, such as, you know, Pacman, Yum, and apt. You can't take a Pacman package and just load it into a Debian system. You can't take a Deb package and load it into a Red Hat system. And I mean, there may be ways, you know, to convert one package to the other, but you can't just take an RPM and just install it to a Debian system. So because of that, yep, the release of the 128 core i14 April 31st, it's happening, it's coming. You know, so that's kind of where it falls short, is how do you reconcile all the differences between these systems and their packages? Like I know there's been a couple instances where I thought to myself, wow, I really wish there was this particular package for, say, a CentOS system. Oftentimes CentOS has some older software, and I wish I could just take this newer software from Debian and plug it into Red Hat, but that's not how that works. So snaps, I think, are a way of almost getting to that point. Another question was best Unix CHAD tips and tricks. So I could make an entire stream on CHAD tips and tricks for Linux. So instead, I'll say if you want to be a CHAD on Linux, what you need to have is a good working knowledge of your chosen shell and your scripting, according to your chosen shell. So if it's Bash, of course, you want to be a Bash scripting. If it's ZSH, you want to be whatever they use. So that's how you be a CHAD on Linux. So another good question here was when to know it's appropriate to automate certain actions. This kind of boils down to, there's two types of things you want to automate. The first type of thing is if it's going to take you 6 hours to do manually, but it's going to take you 30 minutes to write automation for it, then certainly you want to just spend the time and write the automation for it, and then you're good to go. That's a fantastic time to do automation. When the time's a little shorter, I don't know. If you're going to do it once and it's going to manually take you a half hour, but it's going to take you 25 minutes to develop something, I don't know. You might want to just do it manually. The second time you want to do it is when you want to do things that you don't want to forget. Like for instance, I built a COVID-19 dashboard for Florida, and I run a job once an hour that checks for a new report and updates everything. Certainly, I could have manually checked the Florida Department of Health website for a new report, and then when I found one, I could have taken it, and then I could have loaded it in automatically myself, but I don't want to forget to do that. I'm going to forget to do that. So because of that, it makes sense for me to write automation that scrapes their site, looks for a new report, and when it finds one, loads everything in. Oh, sorry. I just saw a donation from a while back. Mason Walters, EMT1 line fund. I didn't see that till just now, but it must have been in the chat. Thank you very much for the 20 and also for the funny comment. Yeah, T1. I remember back in the day when I was in high school, or I guess even middle school, if you had a T1 line, you were styling. You had the top of the line stuff going on, and I think T1 line is it was a dedicated 1.5 megabit, I think is what it was. Yeah, I think it was a 1.5 megabit dedicated, and you were just the coolest cat if you had a T1 line. So that's a funny comment. Thank you. So yeah, that's when you want to automate. When you're going to forget, or when the development time to do it manually is a lot higher than what it takes to develop, or if you expect to do it again. If obviously if it takes a half hour to do manually, but a half hour to develop a solution, but you're going to end up using it later on down the road, then it makes sense to automate as well. If for no other reason, you have that code afterwards that you can use for something else. If you're learning about programming, you should just automate everything. It doesn't matter if if it'll take you 10 minutes to do manually, but an hour to do automated, well, it's a good project. It's worth doing in that case because you'll get the experience out of it. All right, next question was from Victor. He actually sent a couple questions in. This was more of like said, I'm really struggling with understanding Grep configurations in EFI. I've had a few drives on my Frankenstein as setup. I'd like to be able to set up Grep to give me the option to pick which drive I want at boot, SD, SDB, etc. I'm not sure there's a way to do so. My current mode of operation is to hit F8 to select a boot device. Not really elegant or ideal. For the COVID toilet paper fund and backup connectivity. Thank you for that. Yeah, so actually, toilet paper is not a problem here. People are not freaking out anymore, so toilet paper is in abundance. Backup connectivity, I've thought about getting that. I've spoken with a separate vendor. The problem is just in options. I don't have outages too much. I don't think I've ever had internet die midstream. It's probably karma from destroying that Windows VM. It's probably Bill Gates. He called up his buddies at my ISP and got me shut down. He's probably upset. So, but thank you very much for the 200. I think that's South African, right? Thank you for that. So as far as for Victor's question, the problem with this is there's one misconception here, and it's that Grub is designed to sit before the drives. So Grub is something that sits on a given drive, and because of that, it means that you have to at least get into that drive. You have to tell the motherboard, I want to boot from this device. Once you say I want to boot from this device, then it's free to look in that device and open up the bootloader, which could be either Windows if it's just a single install, or it could be Grub, where you pick either from Linux or Windows or other distributions. And so the answer here is that there's no real way to do what you're describing. You would still have to pick a drive. Now you could get a giant drive and you could put everything you want on that one drive, in which case you could then use Grub for that. But Grub can't exist on the motherboard, therefore you'll always have to first pick a drive. Yeah, Debian-based system's still best for me. I also feel the same way, and there's actually a question later on down the road that's kind of related to that. You know, in my mind, and certainly this is preference and opinion, is I do feel like Debian-based systems are the quickest to get going. You could just get things installed, no problem. Very, very mature repository upstream, and so I do agree with you in that case. Next question he asked was, reverse or dynamic tunnels are pretty confusing to me no matter how many times I've tried to understand how it works. The reason these are so confusing, and I assumed that he was referring to SSH-L and SSH-R, which do mostly the same thing, but in reverse. So SSH has this neat feature where you can tunnel a local port to a remote IP import. So, and this is super useful. So imagine you have a database located on a cloud server, and that database is running on port, we'll say MySQL 3306, something like that. Then, and say you wanted to access that database locally on your machine. What you could do is you could do SSH-L. You could specify the local port that you want to bind to, and then you specify the service on the remote computer as the remote computer would see it. So if you're on that remote computer and you're going to connect to localhost 3306, then you would do 127.0.0.1:3306, and then you specify the name of the computer to actually connect to. So, you know, remote.com or whatever it is. And then what SSH will do in this case is it'll create a channel between your local machine and your remote machine where it forwards local port 3306 to remote IP 127.0.0.1 port 3306. And effectively what this allows you to do is connect to MySQL on your local machine, but it's actually the remote machine. And this is great because you don't have to actually expose a port. This operates entirely over SSH, which means that as long as you have SSH access to that machine, you can access a port on that machine in this case. So I think the reason this command is so confusing is because this syntax is kind of confusing. And then of course you have this. You know, so it's easy to make a mistake. It's easy to forget that this IP port combo needs to be relative to the remote machine. You know, a lot of people might have put remote.com here, and that would of course been incorrect. That would have been remote.com connecting to remote.com. So SSH has the ability to do the opposite as well with -R, and that binds a remote port to a local IP port combo, but it functions the exact same way. So this would be if you wanted a remote computer to, say you wanted the remote computer to access the database of your local machine. You could do everything in reverse with -R, and it's actually really cool. Oh yeah, the SSH, yeah, SSH-L, SSH-R is amazing. I've done that so much, and you can also chain them. You know, so you can make a tunnel from your local machine to one remote machine, and then you can make a tunnel from that remote machine to another remote machine if you wanted to, you know, access a machine 2 machines away. And I use this all the time. This is extremely useful. It's extremely good for debugging, and it's extremely useful for accessing services that you would otherwise only be able to access from a command line. So sometimes it makes sense to be able to access things from your local machine as if you're on that machine, and this allows you to do that. So very, very handy. And thank you for that question. Next question. This was asked by totally not Kev. This is definitely 100% not Kev runs on Duncan in the chat. This is definitely not from him. So when will you change over to legendary Vim instead of using Nano? So this question actually comes from a discussion that I had with the team the other day, because we're constantly discussing editors and this and that. And the discussion was over, you know, what's Vim's strengths, what's Nano's strengths, why would you use Vim over Atom, why would you use Atom over Vim? And a lot of it comes down to what is it you can be most productive in? Something that I've always said to a lot of people, anytime like an editor argument breaks out in Discord or in my comments, I often remind people that I'm not the type of person that says, like, you should be using Atom. I would never say that. I would never say you should be using VS Code. I would never say you should be using Vim or you should be using Nano. My standpoint has always been and will always be, the best editor is the one that you can be the most productive in. That's it. That's it. And if that's Vim, great. If that's Nano, great. If that's Atom, great. If that's VS Code, great. If it's Visual Studio, terrific. It doesn't really matter. It's all about what can you be most productive in. Now, I do hold some personal views that, for me, and this is the second 2 points here, is no mouse is a problem for me. You know, I'm used to using the mouse. I'm a web developer, primarily. I do other development as well, of course, but most of my work occurs on the web or with web technologies. So I like to use a mouse. I like to be able to select a block of text. I like to be able to do Control X. I like to be able to grab my big, huge mini-map bar, scroll it down to the bottom of the file, and I like to click a place, and I like to paste it in. And with Vim, you can't do that. With Nano, you can't do that. So that's certainly a problem. Now, if I'm in the cloud, if I'm in a remote server, I'm operating through SSH, then Vim, Nano, I could go either way. It makes no difference. Like, I know how to use Vim, certainly not to the level that some people do, like Kev. You know, Kev's extremely good at Vim, so is Brainplot. I'm not as good, you know, but I can certainly exit Vim. I can do that. So I guess that's something, right? Maybe do a video on using SSH with AWS or other cloud servers using certs would be great. This looks like after, that's funny. Yeah, certs, I could probably do a video on certs. Certs is something that confuses people because, you know, you got the Let's Encrypt, you got the not Let's Encrypt people, you got the wildcard. I don't even know if they do EV anymore. They used to, but I don't know if they still do. Yeah, that's my editor thing. You should use whatever you want. That's what it comes down to. Okay, we got a couple questions from Calix. He actually asked more than this, but these were the ones that were not duplicates. So he asked, what is the advantages of using the command line over a GUI interface to navigate files? And the answer is that simply navigating with the command line might actually be slower. I mean, it may be better to, there's obviously GUI programs that let you look at directory trees a lot better than like ls-l. But where the command line is really powerful is finding things. Like if you want to find files that contain a certain text in the name of the file, you know, certainly want to use CLI for that. If you want to do fuzzy searches with wildcard, if you want to do grep through files to find contents within files, if you want to do sorting, if you want to get lists of files irrespective of the tree, you know, like, so for searching and processing, that is when you want to use the CLI. But I suppose if you're just drilling down into directories, then I'd probably just use a GUI in that case. I don't feel the need to, use command line for everything. You know, if I know exactly where I need to go and I want to double click a file and open it, then I'll just use a Yeah, Grep. You know, Grep is extremely powerful, and I'm sure. Oh no, this should be. No, the audio is not off, is it? Can everybody hear me? People are saying there's audio problems in the chat. Okay, okay, so it's just him. Audio clean. All right, good. Perfect. Yeah, so I mean, certain things it's faster for, certain things it's not. But when I think of traversing a file structure, I don't think of speed. I think of utility. And a lot of times I am looking for certain files with file names. I'm looking for all files with a specific extension. I'm looking for files that contain a certain text. And for that, you have to be on the CLI. Second question was, why was the command line invented? This actually relates to a previous question about, you know, terminals, like why does the terminal feel better? And the command line was invented simply because the command line was first. Like they invented that as the first thing. You know, computers didn't always have something visual. Computers didn't always have keyboards, for instance. But once computers started to have keyboards and visual devices that you could actually look at and do things, and this started probably the late 50s, early 60s, I would say, is when that started getting kind of big. You know, particularly like when the C programming language came out and a couple earlier languages, you know, it needed to be visual. And actually, a funny historical note: the reason the 80 character margin came from is because the original terminal on like a cathode ray tube monitor for a specific computer was 80 by 24. And so that's why every now and again there's a terminal that you open the terminal and it's actually the size of 80 by 24. And that's a lot of where that came from. So people that were programming on these early monitors, these small monitors that were rated in not necessarily pixels, but number of characters, were maximum 80 characters wide by 24 lines tall. And it was a 4:3 aspect ratio, but you know, obviously 24 is not 75% of 80. Once you account for the height of the characters and you account for the distance between each character, you end up with a terminal that is between 24 and 25 characters tall. So historically, that's kind of where that came from. So it has historical roots. That's basically what I'm trying to say. And one of the first visual interactive computers was interactive via a terminal. And then only from there did we get, remember, like, you know, GUIs and Windows and all this as we know it today is all an improvement over something that we never used to have. You know, like it's the chicken and the egg thing. You know, the terminal came first. All this visual stuff and GUI, that's all just an afterthought. It was all just an improvement upon what was already a very functional system. All right, we got a few more questions. We'll try to wrap this up in the next like 10-15 minutes. Francis asks, currently using Ubuntu, what would be the next recommended flavor of Linux you would recommend? I would probably check out Arch Linux, or I would check out Linux Mint. It's probably the two I would go after for a desktop user. I'm assuming that this question is asked in the context of, if I'm working on the desktop with Linux, what should I try out next? Arch Linux or Linux Mint, I think, is a good option. And I don't know if Francis is in the chat. Let me know if you're in the chat. Next question was, I keep reading how Linux is compatible with older machines. Considering purchasing a new Dell machine besides Ubuntu, what other flavors would be compatible? So Linux compatibility is broken down into kind of 2 points. The first point is architecture, and the second point is driver. So if we're speaking about Linux compatibility architecture-wise, then Linux can pretty much be thought of as universally compatible. It's been around long enough to where it supports nearly all architectures. You'd be hard pressed to find a machine in 2020 for which Linux does not run. However, that's just kernel, and that's just talking to the CPU. The second piece is drivers. So that's also what lends to Linux's compatibility. Of course, if Linux boots, but it doesn't recognize any of your hardware, then Linux is therefore useless. So for compatibility in 2020, if you're using a modern machine with a modern Linux distro, you could pretty much expect that every single one of your drivers are going to work. There's notable exceptions, of course. One is video. Video is very complicated, and it's hard to make good drivers for it. And I'm sure there's some politics in there as well as it relates to Linux and NVIDIA. But for the most part, excluding video drivers and excluding specialized hardware and devices, you can expect that things are going to work out of the box. Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, keyboards, microphones, speakers, that sort of stuff. All that, for the most part, you can expect that to just work. But here again, the farther back in time you get, remember, Linux is what's called a monolithic kernel, meaning that it's just one giant kernel that contains all the drivers that have ever been written. And I'm sure there's drivers that are in there that were written in the early to mid 90s and that are still in there today. Excuse me, still in there today for machines that have those. So it doesn't really matter how far back in time you go. Certainly the farther back in time you go, the less possibility of compatibility exists. But generally speaking, Linux is pretty good. 2 more questions. Next question, actually, I'm going to check the question log real quick. I feel like I'm falling behind here. Brand Plant asks, is there anything you find too awkward to do on the command line that you prefer a GUI for? And I would say probably files. Probably if I'm just navigating a tree, I want to navigate fast, I find that a GUI is better for that. Let's see. That's a good question. Let me continue to think on that. Ash asked, your top 3 Linux commands. Probably Grep. Grep is 100% in my top 3. I use it all the time. It's extremely versatile for finding anything, whether it's sorting a list of files or looking in files. Grep is extremely powerful. That's definitely one. That's definitely in my top 3. I'm trying to think of another one. Let me think on that as well as we continue here. So the next question from Francis was, I'm a developer but use Windows for work. What Linux flavor would you recommend for web and API development? So as far as web and API development, there is no distro that's optimized for web and API development. Web and API development is going to be just whatever runs your editor of choice, which will be every single Linux distro. So there's no specific one just for that. Anyone will do. Now, my preference for, of course, I'm a web developer. My preference for distros when I want to get work done are ones that just get me going fast and just get out of my way. I'm not the sort of person that wants to spend 20 hours customizing my Linux system or anything. I want to throw the USB key in the computer. I want it to just install with like 15 clicks, and then I want it to just work. And I want it to continue working, and I want the software to be available when I download it, and I don't want to deal with any of the BS. But that's me. Now, that's for my productivity system. Like my workstation that I'm on right now that we're doing the stream on, that system falls into that category. I want to just get moving. I want it to just work. I don't want to mess with it. I don't want it to break. I'm pretty anti-change when it comes to my workstation, because I want it to just be available to do what it needs to do. And for me, and again, this is preference, Linux distros are always preference. My go-to distro for this is Xubuntu. And 20.04 just came out. I'm planning on upgrading to that. Although I'm cautious to upgrade because I'm concerned that it will reduce my ability to be productive. So I'm hesitant to actually upgrade, but I still may. Yeah, IPA. IPA is actually a good replacement for ifconfig. A lot of people do ifconfig, but ifconfig is actually not guaranteed to be on a system. That's a separate package. IPA, I think, is pretty much always guaranteed to be on all systems. So Yes, what distro are you using right now? Xubuntu, absolutely, 100%. And that's pretty much all I've ever used. When I first started using Linux, and this was in probably 2001, maybe 2000, I used, maybe it was a little later than that. I don't remember exactly. It was one of the first versions of Xubuntu. I'm sorry, just Ubuntu with GNOME, and it was so old and garbage looking. That was one of the first I ever used. I would later switch to Kubuntu a couple years later, and I used that for many years, probably the next 10 years at least, I would say. And then Kubuntu never seemed to grow, and it seemed to just be it was too much. It was too much, too many transitions, too bulky, too much. Way too resource intensive. So after that, I would switch to Xubuntu, and I've been using that ever since. And I expect to continue using it for the foreseeable future because it just works for me. I don't have to, it doesn't get in my way. Software is always there when I need it. Don't have to mess with it. So, excuse me. And finally, the last question. This was a fun one. This was asked by ghost emoji, dog emoji, another ghost emoji, face, computer emoji, emoji guy. And emoji guy is, of course, Zach from the chat. So he asked, you log into your cloud server, something's up. The hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Your dog lets out a low, confused whimper and lifts his head up slowly, looking at you with those eyes. He senses it. You sense it. There's a ghost in the shell. Now what? Spend a few minutes talking about what commands you would run if you were suspicious the Linux machine you just logged into was somehow compromised. Explain your reasoning, where you'd start, why, and to what end would ultimately make you trust your machine again. So I've actually had this happen. It usually happens when I'm doing work for a client that doesn't care about the security of their system. And there's been situations where I've gone into the system and I've just known that somebody was in there. You know, either because there's weird logins or there's missing files or something's out of place. And so I've made, and this is not an exhaustive list of things I would check, but this is some of the high points that I would do to restore my confidence in that system and ensure that the person's been locked out or removed. So, you know, I'd start by just hitting W. You know, by hitting W, you get a list of everything that's on the system. Let me see what my W outputs on my machine. Yeah, so on let me log into EMKC. So on EMKC, if you run W, you immediately, all right, whatever, it's I don't care. You know, if you run W, you see who's logged in currently. So this shows that I'm logged in. Please don't hack me. You know, it shows that I'm logged in currently. I've been logged in for, you know, 1 second. I'm idle, whatever. But this is one of the first things you could do to see if there's anybody currently on your system. So I would start there. After I run W, I would then continue to do last. And what last tells me is who was recently on the system. So for this, I will go to my normal machine, and one common thing is last head, and that gives me the last logins to my system. So I would look to see if there were any strange IPs they didn't recognize on there, and yeah, I don't really care. Have my IP, I don't care. You know, this shows me who's logged into the machine recently. So, and all of these is just because I got like 18 terminals open on my machine. So this is why, you know, I got PTS 10, 11, 12, and they're all recently. But ordinarily, it would show you the IP they logged in with as well. So if you happen to see something weird on there, then you can have a pretty solid guarantee that somebody's been on your machine. And from there, there's other steps that you might want to take. So of course, the next thing I would do is I would run history. It's another command I'm worried about running. I'm not going to run it, but history, of course, would show you all the commands that you've executed within a previous session. And I say previous session because the history only writes to your bash history after you log out. If you type a bunch of commands and you run history-c, then it actually removes all the history for that current session. But sometimes people who might be trying to cover their tracks, they fail to do that, and it might write it out to the bash history. So I would type history, and I would see if there's anything in that particular file that seems out of place. If there is, then yeah, we're going to get to the auth log next. Then I would have a pretty strong guarantee that somebody's been on there. I'd review the auth and SSH log, and that is on various places on certain machines. On this machine, let's see, last var log, is it secure? Auth. Yeah, so in the auth log, you could grep for the word, I think it's accepted. Okay, there's nothing in here because people don't SSH onto this machine. Let me go out to EMKC so I can show you. I really want to show you this. I can't remember exactly. I think like EMKC is CentOS, whereas my local machine is Debian. I can never. Oh, I think it's secure. It's insecure. Okay, I don't want to do that. Too many IPs, but the if you run this particular command. Of course, it doesn't work here, but if you run the less var log secure on Red Hat systems, oh, look at above. Yeah, authentication failure. So authentication failure is, yeah, if it fails, I usually do accepted or session open for user. I guess it's the same, but that will show you when a key was accepted and a person was admitted into your machine. So if you see things like that from IPs that are not ones you recognize, then there's a possibility that somebody's been in your machine. So from there, I would continue to check for rootkits, and there's a program called RK Hunter which does that very well. Install RK Hunter, run RK Hunter, and you are good to go in that case. I'd also check for new users or groups via etc password and etc group. And if I saw something out of place there, I would simply remove them. And finally, I would check the authorized keys file anywhere in the system to make sure that somebody didn't slip their public key in on some random user. That way they can reaccess the machine later. Because that is something they could do. You know, if I compromise somebody's machine, excuse me. If I compromise somebody's machine and I inserted my public key into that machine's, say, root authorized.keys file, I could later log back into that machine even though nobody saw me at that time. So I would check all those files to make sure that they don't contain public keys for people that I don't recognize. Fail to ban is something that I find is more useful for a cloud server, and that's because home server, you kind of have the router in front of your computer anyways. You know, unless you have a port open to your machine, people can't really brute force SSH on your local machine, unless of course SSH was forwarded from your router to your local machine, in which case that's obviously a problem. But on a cloud server, it's a much larger problem because the IP is publicly available to anybody to connect to. And that's an issue. So fail to ban makes sense to use to. Fail to ban is kind of like a thing that catches all the low-hanging fruit. You know, really low-hanging fruit is just random IPs that spam SSH connections against your cloud server. It's easy to just ban those people. And you know, if they pick new IPs, it can do that as well. Nico, hi from Romania. Hello. Welcome to the stream. Glad you could make it. Maybe the fuzzy video is an EM anti-hacker protocol. Let's see. Yeah, there's so many ways. Yeah, so yeah, DDWRT and tomato. Yeah, definitely. If you're using password-based logins, you should definitely stop doing that. That's true of well, I guess on my local machine, I don't even have OpenSSH server running on my workstation because I have no need to SSH into this machine from anywhere else, so I simply don't do that. And that's a good list of things I would check. I could also check netstat to see if anybody has open connections into the machine. I could also check for timestamps. If timestamps for files were modified between my last login. Of course, that's harder because certainly background processes can access files even though you're not on there, but that's something you could look at. There's, I'm sure, files that might not be touched by background processes. If those were modified, you might think that somebody was there. And I'm sure there's other things to do too, but this is a good selection of things to do to make sure that a person is not currently in your system and has no way of accessing your system again with relative certainty. Yeah, disable root login, but that's something you should just do anyways. You know, if you're logging into a server, you should do so not via root. You probably saw me log in directly as root with the MKC just because that's what I do. I don't know. I always log in as root. I don't bother with less privileged users, mostly because everything I do on that cloud server is all privileged stuff anyways. So in my mind, there's no point in logging in not as root just to drop to root anyways. So I just bypass that step. I think that's everything. Let me check the questions log here. Steven asked, can we get a stream on custom creating a Linux? Oh, can we get a stream on custom creating a unique Linux distro? That might actually be beyond my knowledge, but it is something I've always been interested in, is starting with some, I mean, there's things like Hannah Montana Linux out there, so, you know, it can't be that hard to, to make custom distros. Let's see. Oh, I missed this question. Can we revert cron jobs if we hit by mistake cron tab-r? Not as far as I know, because I've actually witnessed people do that, and then it was gone forever. That was it. So I know what I try to do is part of my backup script that I do on a bunch of my servers is part of that is I grab a lot of the configuration that's related to that machine, things like nginx config, mysql config, and of course my cron file. So as far as I know, there's no way that's the equivalent of just RMing a file and then wanting it back. I don't, yeah, satanic Linux. There's a Linux distro for everybody, man. There's so many out there, hundreds. A lot of people think there's only like a few of them, 10 or so. There's hundreds, like 200 to 300 different distributions. Of course, a lot of them are trash. A lot of them are meme distributions like satanic Linux, but there's still a bunch of them that are legit that you probably never heard of. If you actually, I'll show it real quick. Linux distributions. If you ever get a chance, go to the. Oh, you know what I forgot? There's actually 2 more questions. It was late ads. There's one from Pizza and one from somebody else. Let me go get those. I almost didn't answer them. Pizza, your question's coming right now. I didn't add them because they weren't here when I went to sleep last night. Okay, 2 additional questions. I almost didn't answer. Okay, the first question was from definitely not Pizza. His question was, what is your favorite language to write CLI tools in? And I like to write CLI, it depends. If the tool is a simple tool that I'm making, what I do is, oh, just been lurking lately. Keep up the great content. Thank you. Longtime viewer, longtime Discord member. I appreciate the 20. Thanks a lot for that. And thanks for that. Yeah, real late night, like 4 a.m. Thanks a lot for being on the stream. I appreciate that. And keep coming. And if you have any questions, let me know. I'll be happy to answer them. So yeah, he asked, what's your favorite language for writing CLI tools in? If it's simple, I like to just use Bash. Just simple Bash. But if it's not simple, then I reach out to something like Python. You know, Python's a good choice for writing CLI tools in 2020 It's a very simple language that can access command line arguments and do things that I mean, Bash of course can do everything too, but maybe not as easy. So that'd be my answer to that. Now, the final question was from Rehan. He said, any book recommendations about learning the workings of Linux as fast as possible, or perhaps any other written documents? Yes. There's a collection of PDFs from linuxtraining.be. Is it .be? Yeah. Okay, I'm going to post the link in the chat, and I've also posted this on my Discord several times, but one of the greatest PDFs that I think I've read that helped me with just a lot of different commands in a really short period of time is in that link. There's a PDF called systemadministration.pdf. It's extremely long PDF. It's a few hundred pages long, but it contains a lot of the inner workings about Linux. And despite the appearance of the site, which I'll show on yeah, we should post. Can somebody please post the Discord link in the chat? So despite what this site looks like, which is sort of old, this fuzzy tux icon, there's still a lot of really great stuff in these PDFs, and you should definitely check some of these out. They're all really good. Of course, this is purple because I've read it like 10 times, but there's a lot of stuff as well. So these are fantastic PDFs. So that'd be the answer to that question. If you want to go as fast as possible, this is the written document way to learn it as fast as possible. What's your opinion on Linux phones and Linux OSs for phones? That's actually a good question. I've personally never used it, like Postmarket OS. I've personally never used one, but I think it's an interesting concept. I question when I think about pure Linux stuff on phones, I think about, does that reduce my usability of that phone? Because if you think about it, people that develop mobile devices, and they've been developing them for decades now, they do so with user experience in mind and user security in mind. So when I think about a good mobile operating system, I think about one that is the mobile version of my workstation, one that gets out of my way, gives me the tools I need to do, makes it easy for me to navigate, and this and that. With a purely Linux distribution, I question if they've had the same amount of experience in that space. Is a purely Linux distribution on a phone as usable as, say, Android or even iOS for that matter? Can it be used in the same way? And if the answer is no, then it's kind of just a novelty thing to have. Like, oh, I have pure Linux on my phone, which I guess is cool if it doesn't need to be super usable. But here again, I'm making assumptions. I've not personally tried one. I'd like to try Postmarket OS. I think that'd be neat. In fact, I have a bunch of old phones that I'm sure would run Postmarket OS. So yeah, I could check it out. Any recommendations for a monitor? Well, my monitors are, what are they? K272 HULs. They're 27-inch 2K monitors. They're actually pretty inexpensive. I think I paid like $190 a piece for them, which is not that much for a 2K 27-inch monitor. So I mean, it's it's junk TN panels. It's nothing nice. If you're doing things that require good color clarity, these are probably not the monitors for you. But they work well enough for 2K 2560 by 1440 resolution. They are Acer K272 HUL. That's what I have. I think I've covered everything now. Yeah, I think I've covered everything. So I think we can call the stream at this point. So yeah, so if you want to go further with if you want to go further with anything you've learned here, certainly check out our Discord. The link was just posted. I think we're getting close to 8,000 people at this point, with about 20 to 40% online at any given time, talking about a variety of topics. There's so many things on the Engineer Man Discord server that you are guaranteed to find topics and people that are like-minded with yourself. So you should definitely check it out. As far as the next stream, it'll be roughly 1 month from now, 3 to 4 weeks from now. I don't know the exact topic. There's a channel, if you want to influence the topic, there's a channel on my Discord called Stream Planning. And in that channel is kind of the brainstorming for the next stream. And we'll choose that sometime in the next couple of weeks, 3 weeks or so. And then we'll schedule, just like we always do, choose the topic next 3 weeks or so, schedule it 1 week out, post the Google Forms link so you can submit your questions. So we'll do that just as usual. Of course, thank you to everybody that donated during the stream. I really appreciate it. I am super sorry about the interruption. I do like how my chart, it went up and then it went down and then it went back up. So pretty much all but like 20 people showed back up. So that's fantastic. Glad you guys stuck around with that. The chart's kind of ugly. It's looking bad. So thanks to everybody who showed up for the stream. Thank you to everybody who continues to show up to streams. It means a great deal to me. I'm glad you come out to support it. I see a lot of the same names in the chat all the time, so I think that's fantastic. And then I see some new people, like there's some new people that I've never seen today. So for any first-time people on the stream, I apologize that it was marred by a 20-minute, internet problem, but I assure you that in the 39 streams that we've done, that's never happened. And I hope that it doesn't happen for another 39. That would be fantastic. So other than that, I'll post all my notes to GitHub shortly after the stream, and I hope everybody stays safe from COVID-19 and has a fantastic rest of your weekend. And other than that, I hope to see you on future Engineer Man streams, future Engineer Man videos, or in my Discord server. And other than that, have a great rest of your day, and take care.